Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Enterprise Alchemy. I'm Ant. Now, unfortunately, this evening I'm not joined by my colleague Doug, but I am joined by Megan Burke, executive coach and HR business partner. Megan, thank you very much for joining us on this episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Excellent. So, the topic of this episode, the rise of the 3-day work week. Let's just, I think, get straight to the content for the audience. Okay, we've heard the 4-day work week, right? I think that's something that's been going around a bit. What is this 3-day work week thing of which you speak? Is this some kind of magic?
Well, first off, first it sounds pretty great, right?
Yeah.
I think
I'm in.
I think when we said, hey, there could be a 4-day work week, I'll do you one better. Let's talk about the 3-day work week. So I think a few things are going on, let's say with technology and the workforce, that sort of lend themselves to this notion of a 3-day work week being an actual possibility. So, you've mentioned 4-day work week. We're seeing increased dialogue around the 4-day work week, right? More evidence that it's possible, more evidence that it works. And now we're starting to see, okay, the 3-day work week come up in conversation. I think Bill Gates talked about it on Trevor Noah's podcast back in November.
Right.
Korn Ferry published an article about it. You can't necessarily have the 3-day work week without AI. So that's where the technology comes in.
Oh, I see. Right.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting.
So from I suppose flowing on from that, you've been on the front lines, right, of talent acquisition for a decade or more with some of the world's best known companies.
Yeah.
What sort of trends are you seeing? What stuff is floating around at the moment that's kind of leading to this even consideration of the 3-day work week? Like, what are some of the trends in and around that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started off my career in talent acquisition and have ping-ponged back and forth between PA and business partnering for almost 18 years at this point.
Wow.
And so what I've seen, so it's been a while. So what I've seen is, I'm going to call it like a mindset shift or a loyalty shift within the workforce, right? So gone are the days of someone working for one company forever, retiring with your pension, and, kind of settling into your career and having that be that. Layoffs are happening at increasing rates, right? We had more than 240,000 tech layoffs last year in 2023. So I don't think, and I don't think I know anybody in my age range that has entered the workforce and hasn't either been personally affected by a layoff or hasn't known somebody that has been impacted from a layoff. So this notion of employees being loyal to their companies forever is almost completely gone at this point, right? So employees are looking for ways to better themselves because companies necessarily aren't being loyal to them.
Right.
So there's a lot, I think, going on that's really shifting what we see in the workforce. And this kind of loyalty shift is pretty prevalent.
Yeah, and I suppose that makes sense as well with the increased, let's say, globalization of the workforce, access to not just from the company side of access to talent, but from the employee, or potential employee standpoint, there's a lot more access to employers. It's even, I know when I was a kid and watching my parents work, the whole thing was you went to work physically every day. So it had to be somewhere that you could commute to.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the one of the great things that the pandemic gave us was more of this globalization of a workforce, remote and hybrid work. So there are a lot of jobs where you can still work anywhere. And that is not an issue. So that opens up so many more opportunities for the workforce that wasn't there certainly 18 years ago. Some of this wasn't even here 5 years ago.
Yeah. So just I suppose expanding on this thread a little bit or pulling on the thread, you talked about people's changing, let's say,
Mhm.
requirements. Um,
Yeah.
are there values shifts, do you think, that are accompanying this? Like, is this a, does the younger generation, let's say, coming into the workforce, do they value things the same or differently as previous generations? Like, what are you seeing? What are your views on that?
Yeah, so I definitely think generation is a factor from a workforce perspective on what people want
Right.
for them at their time, right? I think we're seeing, first off, record numbers of people suffering from burnout, with like 59% of Americans saying, hey, I'm burned out, right? That's huge.
Yeah, yeah.
We haven't seen those numbers ever. I think to piggyback off on that, half of Gen X is looking to early retirement. So they're saying, hey, I'm done. I want out of the workforce altogether. Um, Millennials are more and more shifting towards this desire to be with a company that provides them purpose and also that is environmentally and socially conscious,
Hmm, hmm.
right? So this whole, wanting to understand where their companies are giving their money to, how their companies have a footprint, big or small, on the environment and climate change. That's something that certainly was not even a topic of conversation with employees when I started recruiting, in the early 2000s. I think, and now we're seeing too, Gen Z is interesting because um, they are the most disengaged and ambivalent from a generation perspective in the workforce. Less
Okay.
than 1 in 5. I know, and I've seen it live, and I think, yeah, okay, I can see that sometimes. Um, but less than 1 in 5 Gen Z said they want to work in a team compared to working solo, with 31% of Gen Z saying, I'd rather just completely work alone. So you're seeing just pretty big, I think, shifts in even the way different generations are thinking about work,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
more so than we ever have.
It sounds like there is an underlying current of a values shift. Um,
Hmm.
I wonder, do they see money differently? Do you think is that part? I'm genuinely curious here because I know even if I think back to my career and I started a similar time to yourself, like in
Yeah.
the early 2000s, and it's very much like, well, you should be happy to have a job, and yes, you are going to have to put up with
Hmm.
some amount of grief, and that's just generally how the
Sure.
world of work is. But
Yeah.
I think we're seeing that this current generation, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the one on the front lines, are saying, yeah, that's not going to kind of cut it for me
Hmm.
anymore, particularly if they are high potential, highly mobile talent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, gosh, I mean, since about 2008, when the US went through their financial crisis, and that was kind of happening in other parts of the globe, there just hasn't been a whole lot of stability for a large population of people in the workforce. So I think that has really changed. Again, it's certainly that loyalty shift, knowing that, man, everybody's replaceable. I'm replaceable. I could, lose my job tomorrow depending on something. So it's really started to have people look at work just from a totally different perspective, right? So where they work, money is certainly a motivating factor. I think money will always be a motivating factor for people. We don't work for free. That's the point of working,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is to be paid. But like, that's just not going to be enough to retain talent anymore
Right.
from a different generation perspective. So Gen Z wants different things, millennials want different things, Gen X, boomers are kind of, going to be out of the workforce probably within 10 years. So it's just kind of a big shift on a candidate slate level that I certainly haven't seen anything like this in my almost, 18 years.
Right. So on that then, and I know you talked about that 18 years. Maybe just help the audience understand a little bit about your background, right? How you've kind of learned all of this stuff. And I know, this is all firsthand experience. So maybe just, yeah, tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah. So I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up
Right.
and just kind of fell into the world of talent acquisition. And turns out I loved it. So half my career has been in talent acquisition, from sourcing, full cycle recruiting, executive search, leading large talent acquisition teams. The other half has been a business partner. So partnering with senior level C-suite leaders on all of their, people and human capital strategies and needs. And then
Ah,
most recently, I've been, gotten some executive coaching certifications. So that is my next journey, is to go more of the coaching route.
right. I see. So sort of combining the coaching with what you've learned about, you know, it, it really is human capital, like you said, human capital strategy and human capital management, how to
Hmm.
get the most out of people. So what
Yeah, yeah.
was there, let's say, uh, I know I think in some ways you're very lucky to have kind of, you fell into something, it sounds like, but you're like,
I
actually,
did.
I love what I fell into. So that's kind of
I
a
did.
serendipitous moment, let's say. But is there anything that stands out in that journey that you think has influenced your professional trajectory?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had, when I was a recruiter for a big, we'll say, biotech ag company, I supported the finance organization, and the HR lead, she tapped me on the shoulder one day and she said, "You've done a great job recruiting for my organization. How about you try being an HR business partner?" And initially I thought, oh my God, no, is that dealing with people's problems all day? Like, I'm helping people get jobs and giving them good news. I don't want to give anybody bad news or do any of the tough stuff. And so she really kind of pushed me out of my comfort zone and said, okay, do it for a year. If you hate it, you can always go back to TA. I'll make sure they, have a spot for you if you hate this. But I really think you're going to like it, and you're going to learn so much, and you're going to grow. And I turns out I loved it. So I think without having someone kind of helped push me out of my comfort zone,
Right.
I think I probably would have had a very different career.
Yeah. Okay, I get it. Makes sense. So here's not to kind of get sidetracked, but um outside of work,
Yeah.
interested just to get to know you a little bit, for our audience to get to know you. What stuff
Yeah.
you enjoy doing? Who is Megan outside of being a HR superstar?
Yeah. So I live in Colorado, and I absolutely love all things nature and outdoors. So I am in the perfect space for me. I love hiking. I've always been an athlete, so movement has been an integral part of my life. So whether it's running, hiking, skiing, all the typical Colorado things, I absolutely love. I love to travel, and so have been excited to get back into that more, since we had to take a little travel break during the
Ah,
pandemic.
yes.
And
Yeah.
then, yeah, and then I have two. I love dogs. I have two rescue dogs, and I just love spoiling them and taking them on all sorts of outside adventures.
Very cool. So sort of very sporty, it sounds like. You're into the
Yeah,
physical
I think so.
pursuits. Yeah, that's awesome. Um, so in terms of, and this is something I like to just ask guests, because I find it, it's one question that seems to draw up some interesting stuff, right? So this is one I like to
Yeah.
ask people. Um, the one piece of advice, and look, we're all, you start to get to a point where you're more mature and you're not as silly or whatever that you were. You think you knew everything 20 years ago, but actually you realize in hindsight you knew nothing, right? So what's
Uh-huh.
the one piece of advice you would give to the younger Megan?
Yes. No, this is a little not typical advice, right? It would be to care less about work and remember that a job is just a job, a career is just a career. It is not who you are. Everybody is replaceable at work. You are not replaceable at home. So make sure that you've got that balance set up from as early as you can get it. Hold on to it and don't lose it.
Yeah. Okay. Very true. You are replaceable at work and not right. Yeah, that's a lesson as well. I think some of us have had to learn the hard way. So while we're on this subject, Megan, piece of advice for the younger you, and now you've done your exec coaching thing,
Yeah.
leadership advice. I mean, obviously, a lot of people out there will be leading teams or leading organizations. Any key bits that you want to share for now that you've got this coaching thing going on?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think the biggest piece of leadership advice that I would give to any leader at any point in their career is really never stop trying to be a better leader.
Yeah.
Just when you think you know everything, you've seen everything, you still have room to grow, and you haven't seen everything, and you haven't learned everything. So just never stop trying to be better. I think there's some statistics floating around that your direct manager has a bigger impact on your mental health than your spouse.
Jeez.
So you have a responsibility to lead in a way that positively impacts those that you lead. So just never stop trying to be better.
Yeah. I think that's one of those things as well. I think as you age, it can get more difficult. I think, certainly cognitively, we see that as people age, they're less kind of, let's say, I know they talk about neuroplasticity and things like that, but it's like the knowledge becomes less, let's say, pliable. And
Mhm.
so it can become difficult, right? And so I think that's an important message. Now, staying on this kind of theme just for one sec, but really, I think as well, focusing down on what you're seeing in the market right now.
Mhm.
Um, is there any advice you would give, let's say, the C-suite on how to attract and retain top talent in the current marketplace as we are here in 2024?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's two things. So for those leaders who are in industries where remote and hybrid work is a possibility, embrace that,
Right.
because overwhelmingly candidates have spoken, the masses have spoken, and we have said, don't make us go back into an office under the guise of culture and collaboration. So if you can make it work, embrace it and make it work. I think the second thing is make sure you're paying your people well. So make sure you have good compensation data, make sure that it's recent, and make sure that you're paying your people well. With the advancements in kind of the pay transparency journey, it is not taboo anymore to talk about what you make with your coworkers. That is changing a lot of views on, compensation and what people are willing to accept. So yeah, I mean, it's an oldie but a goodie. Like, pay your people well.
Yeah, I'd say that's and it's funny you mentioned that though, because you know, it is such a significant part, right? It's like, well, yeah, I kind of need to be compensated fairly for what I do as a base bare minimum, right? On which you can build other
Yeah,
things. And look, it doesn't, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've seen, people aren't necessarily expecting to be or to receive outsized compensation, but it's just fair compensation. Um,
totally.
that you're not being underpaid relative to the market.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, it's very trendy for a lot of business leaders and HR people to latch on to whatever the new kind of thing is out there, whether it's, career paths, learning and development, different engagement strategies. But a lot of times, the most basic things are the things that you get the most bang for your buck from.
Here's a little side question then on that. I'm just
Mhm.
interested in your views. This one just kind of came into my head and I'm like, I've got to ask her about this. Disclosing salaries on the job ads, right? I've seen like loads of talk
Yeah,
on LinkedIn and stuff of people saying,
yeah,
why did they send me to this interview and they won't tell me how much it's getting paid? And, and like there's various views on this. So give me Megan's view.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's inherently a good thing. I think every company should post the salary range on their roles. But with that said, I think companies can do better. I've seen a lot of jobs out there where the salary range is like, you know, 100,000 to 250,000. Like, okay, come on, that's not remotely realistic. And, I feel like they're kind of BSing their way through that a little bit when they post huge, massive ranges. But yeah, I mean, I think too, if you're a candidate and you are asking the recruiter, during the application process or the interview process, what the salary range for the role is, and they're not telling you, that is not a good sign. And
Right.
rethink working for that company, because that's going to be a sign of other things to come. If they're not transparent with you about what the salary range is, they're probably not going to be very transparent with you about other things.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Because I
I
always
mean,
did.
not a popular one, probably, but
No, I I always did wonder. I'm like, how do you even get people to apply for a job if that you don't tell them what they're going to get paid? And I thought, why
Mhm.
would you want to hide that? Like, seems like well, it's not like you're sort of recruiting people in general for a project to build the Death Star or something, and you're like, this is secret technology, you know what I mean, that we need to keep out of the hands of the rebels.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, it's always confused me a bit. Now one other thing, a little bit of a side question again, but just interested to get your views. I've spoken to quite a few talent acquisition people lately
Mhm.
in various countries, in various industries. Um, some saying, you know, it's really, really like even for TAP, like people, employed
Mhm.
in the talent acquisition function inside businesses. There's a lot of layoffs, that kind of stuff, because the businesses are not recruiting, right? So the growth
Yeah.
plans have been trimmed. Um, just from your own personal opinion at the market level, like, what are you seeing, I suppose, number one? And then number two, where are we at in the cycle? Is it an employer's market or an employee's market?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely an employer's market, right? So I know in 2021, when during the height of the Great Resignation, companies were paying hand over fist and offering people ridiculous salaries because they just couldn't get that talent in the door. And candidates held so much power in the marketplace. Unfortunately, the pendulum has swung the other way, and it is a very different market. It's really tight. I think there's a lot of great talent on the market since we had so many layoffs in starting really in 2022 and then continuing all through 2023. I think we're probably going to be in a tight market for the rest of this year, and then hopefully that pendulum will kind of balance out a little bit more.
Right. Because what it kind of appears to me, uh, like, let's say at the economic level, is obviously, interest rates rising, you could argue normalizing. Obviously
Sure.
the cost of debt increases. The risk-free rate increases. So you basically, you know, people saying, well, growth at all costs is no longer a strategy. And it's always to me like a
Yeah.
sign of a real market bubble, when the strategy is I don't care how much it costs, just grow at all costs. And it seems to me like what's happening now is a bit of a normalization where people are saying we're not having to make massive layoffs unless we went crazy, during the zero interest
Mhm.
rate environment and hired way too many people, but that it's an era of more considered growth, which will mean that there still are jobs that people are wanting to fill, but it's not
Mhm.
that sort of hand over fist, I'll pay whatever it takes, you know,
Yeah.
no cost is too great type thing to bring the talent in the door just because we've got so many seats we need to fill.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, um, you know, since there are so many, we're seeing candidates are staying unemployed a little bit longer than they usually have in the past. And I think that's because for the companies that have embraced hybrid and remote work, now they have a global candidate pool in some instances for roles. So it's incredibly competitive. But then you have people that are maybe being forced to go back into the office that are opting out. No, thank you, friend. So they're holding out for that remote or hybrid role that they really want. Maybe a lot of candidates that moved to different geographies during the pandemic because they could work remote and they thought, let me go, live on my farm somewhere. And, maybe there's not that community infrastructure there that brings lots of jobs to that area. So yeah, I feel like it's a lot of different, it's a symptom of a few different things.
Yeah, right. So it's more than just the economy. It's the mobilization of people, like moving, the hybrid remote thing. And yeah, it sounds like it's a confluence of a lot of factors. So,
Totally.
so let's say within that sphere of consideration, in your personal opinion, what would you encourage companies to stop doing in terms of talent attraction and retention? Like, what's the stuff that you see is hurting them?
Yeah, I mean, so definitely, please stop mandating return to office when it was successful before, because companies that are doing that are seeing higher than expected attrition, meaning they knew they were going to have high attrition, and it is even higher than they thought. But I think a couple other things that kind of we've seen is companies should watch out for whatever their attraction kind of process is. So what's that application process? What's that interview process? If you have clunky, antiquated technology, top talent is not going to sit there and figure out how to get their application, upload their resume and get everything to sync beautifully. They're just not going to take the time to do that. And so we've seen a huge uptick in application drop-off rates. Even though the market's tight, the application drop-off rates of people starting applications and then stopping is pretty high right now. So I would say evaluate that. I think
so people
also
are judging you by your tech.
Totally.
Yeah,
but
right.
I mean, because I'm thinking if I'm going to apply for a job and it's a clunky process, like, God, well, what else is clunky over there? This should be their best foot forward to try to get the talent in the door. And if this is their best foot, maybe you're opting out. I think too, when it comes to interviewing, we're seeing lots of candidates drop off in the middle of the process when companies have a unreasonably long interview process, or when companies are asking employee or potential employees to create a presentation that is solving one of their work problems. So, we're having this problem. How would you solve it? Make us a deck and come in and give us this presentation. So it's almost feeling like free work. You're trying to get the job, but you're working for free in that process. So I think those are two pretty easy things that companies can evaluate and fix.
Yeah, I must say I never really understood that. This is a 7-stage interview. I'm like, oh my God, why?
Yeah.
How much information do you need from somebody, right? Like, is it just me, or because like to me, I look at that and just say no thanks. That's, I mean, obviously,
Totally.
not that I'm in the job market, but just as a general concept, like if your product is something trying to attract talent, and you're saying, right, you just have to jump through these 7 hoops, and then you're in with a shot. You'd be like, oh God, that's just difficult.
Yeah. No, it is. And I think, too, it speaks to the level of decision-making or decision-making power that those leaders have in the company. If you have to meet with 15 people before, they can decide on if they want to hire you or not, to me, that's a bit of a red flag.
Go on. I'm interested in this one. So,
because I think
it's a red. So you talked about the decision-making. So this is really interesting to me. So what does it say to you, right, as a talent acquisition professional, someone who can look at some of these other businesses and go, what is the red flag?
Yeah, I mean, I think it either speaks to the level of like empowerment that the hiring managers or those leaders have, right? Because if you got to meet with your potential boss, their boss's boss, okay, that's not really, empowering their hiring leaders to make a decision. and or if you have to interview with so many people, to me it says maybe they make their decisions by consensus or they make their decisions by committee, and they're not really allowing their leaders to kind of have control of that business and run it in a way that they see fit and appropriate.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, I get it.
And I
Because
get that
this is
that can be kind of a big statement that I just threw out there.
no, 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 no. Like I did, particularly that second one, right?
Mhm.
It's something I did think about, like this whole idea of consensus, because I'm like, well, if you went through that many steps, what about if, like, let's say you met 20 people, what if like 7 or 8 say no, but 12 say yes? And then it's like,
Right?
does it need unanimous? Does it need 2/3? You know what I mean? It's becoming almost like a political, you know what I mean? Vote. You're running for
Totally.
the presidency or something.
Totally. And then it also kind of comes to the fact of how successful is that candidate or then potentially employee. So let's say they say yes. How successful is that employee truly going to be if they've interviewed with all of these people? Half the stakeholders said no, half said yes. Anytime there's going to be a little stumble, maybe in that employee's performance, the naysayers are going to be real quick to say, like, oh, see, I told you so, you shouldn't have hired them. And I've seen that many times.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I can. So, all right. So, putting all these things together, right? The good, the
Yeah.
bad, the in between. Um, just for the audience, just one or two kind of takeaways that they can, something that practical, and straightforward they can take and implement around this stuff to make sure that they're getting the right people, and that, wherever you want to take it, if the values match, I'll leave it up to you, but just like if you needed to give one or two takeaways, what would they be?
Yeah. So I think, I feel like I've said this several times. I'm going to say it one more time just to hit it home. Embrace hybrid and remote work.
Yep.
It's not going away. It opens your talent pool exponentially. And then I think one thing that I didn't necessarily touch on from a retention perspective is to make sure that you have a multifaceted engagement and retention strategy. So one size does not fit all. One size does not even probably fit most at this point. So make sure that you are, kind of paying attention to that and being intentional and thoughtful when you're building that out.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Very fair point. Um, so I'll normally Doug does this, but obviously Doug isn't here for this particular episode.
Mhm.
We miss you, Doug. And he always likes to ask this question, so I feel like in his absence, I should be asking this because he's a total bookworm, right? Um,
Oh, yeah.
top few, doesn't have to be three, but the top books that you've read that shape the way you think about business or leadership, like work related stuff.
Yeah. So first is Think Again by Adam Grant. I love that because it just really challenges you to think about your own perspectives, right? And continue to seek out different perspectives and different information. So that's a good read for business or life. And then the other one I really love is called It's the Manager by Jim Clifton and Jim Harder from Gallup. So it's really a culmination of a whole bunch of great data and studies, saying that the quality of managers and team leaders is the single biggest factor in your organization's long-term success. And so someone who has hired a ton of leaders, coaches leaders, supported leaders, I can say that is absolutely very true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Look, and I would say certainly, it's the work that we do, right? We see this all the time. And I think as well, it starts all the way at the top, right? And,
Hmm.
easy to push it down and say, well, it's not our fault, it's their, and each person pushes it down, but and I saw, this American guy, Jocko Willink or Yoko Willink, whatever, the Navy SEAL
Uh-huh.
guy, right? I see him, he's on lots of podcasts doing the leadership stuff. Um, and he's saying, well, it all comes back to you as the team leader or the manager, right? It's all you. There is nothing else. And I
Yeah.
think that is uh, the data more and more is proving that out. Even though you would say, from a face validity perspective, it's obvious. People maybe
Hmm.
don't want to acknowledge that that's true, but it is. And I'm glad to see the data is proving that out. So for everyone out there, it's the manager. Go and have a read of that, because I'm going to have a look as well. Just, if nothing else, it gives me some more data points, right, in my arsenal. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this episode of Enterprise Alchemy. I'm Ant. We were joined by Megan Burke, executive coach and HR business partner and talent acquisition specialist. Megan, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insights.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. It was so fun.
Excellent. All right, guys, thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you on the next episode.